When my parents passed away during my college years, my Uncle David and Aunt Rachel took me in without hesitation. Their home became mine, and their son Marcus, technically my cousin, was more like a brother. For years, that house was the only real family I knew. I helped however I could, contributed to bills, and believed we all cared for one another equally. Life moved forward, and though grief left its mark, I thought we had built something strong, something unbreakable. 7 years later, I was 28 and finally starting to find my footing. I'd spent months applying for jobs and enduring endless interviews, so when the email arrived offering me a position at a tech firm with a solid salary and benefits, I felt like my parents would have been proud. Uncle David insisted on throwing a family dinner to celebrate. Even Marcus came home early from work and, for a while that evening, laughter filled every corner of the dining room. Plates clattered, wine glasses clinked, and it felt like we were all exactly where we belonged. Then Kelly, Marcus's wife, announced she had news too. She'd been quiet all night, smiling in that polite, distant way she always did around me. Setting her fork down, she said calmly, "I'm pregnant." The room exploded in joy. Uncle David's eyes filled with tears. Aunt Rachel hugged her. Marcus leapt up, beaming from ear to ear. I was thrilled for them. They had been trying for a long time, and I immediately started picturing myself as the cool uncle, someone their future child could look up to. But that warmth didn't last long. After the laughter died down, Kelly cleared her throat again. Her tone changed, measured, cold, deliberate. "There's something else I need to talk about," she said, her eyes fixed on me. "Now that I'm pregnant, Daniel, I think it's time you found your own place." At first I thought she was joking. The entire room fell silent. Aunt Rachel's smile faded and Marcus looked like he hadn't processed what she'd said. I laughed awkwardly. "What do you mean? There's plenty of space here. When the baby comes, I can help out." Her expression didn't soften. "That's exactly the problem," she replied. "We'll need privacy for our family. Our immediate family. You've got a good job now, you can afford to move out." The words hit me like a slap. Immediate family. After 7 years under the same roof, sharing holidays and late-night talks, she was drawing a line between them and me. I tried to reason with her, keeping my voice steady. "There's more than enough room here. We can reorganize things for the nursery. You don't have to worry." But she cut me off sharply. "You're not getting it. When I have the baby, I'll be recovering. I'll be breastfeeding. I'll be vulnerable. It's not right to have someone outside the family living here." Outside the family? I felt the air drain from my chest. Uncle David's hand tightened around his glass, but he stayed quiet. Aunt Rachel looked down at her plate, trembling. I tried again, softer this time. "Kelly, I'm not an outsider. I'm family." She tilted her head with this condescending sympathy that almost made my blood boil. "Daniel, I'm not trying to force you out. But you've been here for years. Don't you think it's time you learned some independence? Some self-respect?" I could barely speak. She was lecturing me about self-respect while trying to throw me out of my own home. That's when Uncle David slammed his hand on the table. "Enough, Kelly. You're out of line." His voice shook with anger. "Marcus, take your wife to your room." But Marcus, my brother in all but name, just frowned. "Dad, she's pregnant. You can't yell at her. And she's not wrong. Daniel's been here a long time. Maybe it's time he moved out." Something in me cracked. Marcus turned toward me, his voice quieter but crueler in its honesty. "Look, man, I didn't want to say this in front of everyone, but Kelly and I have been talking about this for months. We need our own life. And honestly, at your age, still living here, it's not a good look. People ask about it all the time. It's awkward." There it was. The truth behind Kelly's privacy. They weren't concerned about space. They were embarrassed by me. Uncle David's face went red with fury. "Then you can get out too," he shouted. Everyone froze, and in that heavy silence I realized something I had spent years being quiet, making myself small, trying to belong. That silence had taught them that they could walk over me, but not anymore. With my hands trembling under the table, I finally spoke. Kelly Marcus, you're mistaken about a few things. The room was still as I explained everything. How after my parents' funeral, Uncle David had given me back every check I ever wrote him, the ones I'd thought covered my living costs, 14 months of payments all untouched. How I'd used that money along with my parents' life insurance to buy this house outright. Every bill, every tax payment, every repair had come from me. When I finished, the color drained from Marcus's face. Kelly's jaw clenched, her smugness gone. Uncle David nodded silently, confirming it all. Yes, son, he said to Marcus. This house belongs to Daniel. It always has. The celebration dinner dissolved into shock and shame. Kelly stood up without a word, her expression twisting into hatred before she stormed upstairs. Marcus followed her, avoiding my eyes, and as the house fell into silence, I finally understood something my parents had tried to teach me. Kindness without boundaries only breeds entitlement. The next morning, the house was painfully quiet. I woke before dawn, unable to shake the heaviness in my chest. Every word from last night replayed in my head: Kelly's cold tone, Marcus's disappointment, Uncle David's pained silence. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the steam rising from the mug, trying to convince myself things would calm down once everyone cooled off. At work, I could barely focus. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from Marcus, maybe even an apology, or at least some explanation. But there was nothing. By the time I drove home around 6:00 p.m., I was exhausted emotionally and physically. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed something strange. The lights were off, and the entire house was still. No TV sounds, no clinking dishes, no smell of dinner from Aunt Rachel's kitchen. Just silence. When I tried to unlock the front door, the key didn't fit. Confused, I jiggled it again, thinking it might be jammed. Then I realized the lock had been changed. My stomach twisted. I tried the back door. Same thing. Both locks were new. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door of my own house, the home I had paid for, and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then from upstairs, a window opened. Kelly appeared, her face twisted with triumph. "You're not taking this house from me," she shouted, her voice shrill and furious. "You can't just throw out a pregnant woman. This is my home now." And before I could respond, she slammed the window shut. I just stood there frozen. My hands shook as I looked up at the window. She had locked me out of my own home and was now pretending to be the victim. The anger rose slowly, hot, sharp, and cold all at once. I walked back to my car and sat inside, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Marcus. My cousin. My brother. Surely he didn't agree to this. Surely he didn't know. I debated for 20 long minutes. Part of me wanted to wait to give them a chance to fix this mess, but deep down I knew. Kelly had planned this. She wanted me gone, and she wasn't going to stop until she had her way. I took a deep breath and called the police. The dispatcher was calm and polite. "Do you have proof of ownership?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "The house deed is in my name." She told me officers would arrive in about 30 minutes. I sat in my car watching the darkened windows of my own home, wondering how it had come to this. When the police car finally pulled up, I felt a mix of dread and relief. 2 officers stepped out, older men, the kind who looked like they'd seen everything twice. I explained what happened, the family dinner. Kelly's demand that I move out, the revelation that the house was mine, and how I came home to find myself locked out. I showed them the deed, both the digital copy and the physical one I kept in my car. They exchanged glances, one shaking his head slightly. "All right," one said, "let's talk to her." I stayed by my car as they approached the door and knocked. Their voices were calm, professional, but firm. When Kelly opened the door, I saw her face morph from surprise to anger to calculated innocence in a split second. She placed a hand on her stomach, adopting a trembling voice. "What's going on? My husband and I live here with his family. He's trying to kick us out. I only changed the locks for safety after he got aggressive when I told him I was pregnant. The officer held up a hand. Ma'am, we've seen the ownership documents. This house belongs to him, he said, gesturing toward me. Changing the locks without the owner's permission is illegal. Kelly's facade cracked. Her voice rose. This is ridiculous. I'm pregnant. You can't just throw a pregnant woman out on the street. The officer's tone hardened. Your husband doesn't own this property. This gentleman does. You're unlawfully excluding the rightful owner. You can either unlock the door and leave voluntarily, or be arrested for trespassing. For a moment, Kelly just stood there, breathing hard fury burning behind her eyes. Then she turned, stomping up the stairs. 10 minutes later, she came down, dragging a suitcase, Marcus following behind her. His shirt was wrinkled tie loose, eyes red. He looked wrecked. Daniel, he began, his voice breaking. But I raised a hand. Not now. Kelly brushed past us without another word, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus lingered, searching for something to say, but nothing came. He just turned and followed her to the car. The officers stayed until a locksmith replaced the locks again. Before leaving, one of them turned to me and said quietly, I've been doing this for over 20 years. Family cases are the hardest, but you did the right thing. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. When Uncle David and Aunt Rachel returned home that night, they looked shattered. Aunt Rachel cried as I explained what happened. Uncle David's shoulders slumped. I'm so sorry, he said. We should have told Marcus everything years ago. We should have backed you up more clearly at dinner. This never should have happened. I tried to assure him it wasn't their fault, but we all knew something had broken that couldn't be easily fixed. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing against me. I thought about Kelly's twisted smirk, Marcus's hollow stare, and how fast love can turn into betrayal. But underneath the pain, something else stirred relief. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself. The days that followed felt strange, quiet, but heavy. Uncle David and Aunt Rachel avoided talking about the incident, though I could see the guilt in their eyes. The house felt emptier now, but the silence carried a different weight. It wasn't just about Kelly or Marcus being gone, it was about the realization that family can sometimes fracture without warning, leaving behind cracks that never fully heal. 2 days later, I received a text from Marcus. Just 2 words. We need to talk. My chest tightened. Maybe this was his attempt to mend things, I thought. Maybe he wanted to apologize. But when he called that evening, his voice was cold, almost unrecognizable. You didn't have to call the cops, man, he began. You humiliated her. Kelly's pregnant, and you made her pack her things in front of strangers. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone steady. Marcus. She changed the locks on my house. She kicked me out of my own home. What was I supposed to do? He scoffed. You keep saying your house like we're strangers. Dad always called it the family house. You made it sound like we were freeloaders. That's not what I said, I replied quietly. I just told the truth. His voice hardened. You threw my wife out because of money, because of ownership. You've become obsessed with it. Do you know what Dad said when we were kids? That real family doesn't keep score. But that's all you do now, keep score. I swallowed hard. The only score I've ever kept was how many times I bit my tongue to keep the peace. How many times I helped without asking for anything back. And the moment I drew a line, you decided I wasn't family anymore. There was silence on the other end for a long moment before he said the words that cut deepest. Your parents would be ashamed of you. I closed my eyes, every muscle in my body tightening. For a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe. You don't get to say that, I said quietly, but he'd already hung up. After that call, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one Marcus had always sat in. For years, we'd shared meals there, laughed there, argued there. And now it just sat in silence, like a ghost of everything we'd lost. Aunt Rachel came in carrying a dish of lasagna, my mother's recipe. She smiled faintly. "I thought you could use something familiar," she said, setting it down. Uncle David joined us, the three of us eating together in near silence. Halfway through the meal, Aunt Rachel reached over and touched my hand. "Your mother would be proud of you, Daniel. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean betraying family. It means respecting yourself." Uncle David nodded, his voice low. "She's right. You've carried more than your share of burdens for years. You didn't do anything wrong." For the first time, I actually believed them. Over the next few weeks, things slowly settled. I focused on preparing for my new job, grateful for the distraction. Uncle David and Aunt Rachel were supportive, though I could see the pain behind their smiles. Marcus was still their son, and Kelly, despite everything, was carrying their grandchild. They were torn between love and loyalty, and I didn't envy their position. But one evening, Aunt Rachel told me something that made my stomach turn. "Kelly's been complaining about you for months," she confessed softly. "Even before she got pregnant. She said you made her uncomfortable, that you didn't fit in anymore. The baby was just her excuse." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I thought about all the little moments I had ignored, the tight smiles, the clipped tones, the way Kelly always acted, like I was intruding on something private. I'd mistaken her politeness for acceptance, when in truth, she had been slowly pushing me out for a long time. The next morning, I looked around my house differently. The rooms felt emptier but lighter somehow. The tension was gone, replaced by a fragile peace. I realized I didn't miss Kelly's voice echoing through the halls or the sound of Marcus's footsteps upstairs. What I missed was the illusion of family, the idea that love alone could hold us together. Work started the following week, and it was a relief to be surrounded by structure, by clear expectations and boundaries. Things made sense there. You worked hard, you earned respect. There was no hidden resentment, no unspoken debts. At home, things had always been murkier, family love tangled with guilt, duty, and unacknowledged power dynamics. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I hadn't lost my family that night. I had simply seen them for who they really were. Uncle David and Aunt Rachel remained kind, but I could tell the strain was wearing on them. Every time Marcus called, Aunt Rachel's eyes filled with quiet pain. Every time Kelly's name came up, Uncle David sighed heavily. It wasn't my fault, but I still hated seeing what this situation had done to them. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Uncle David spoke softly. "You did the right thing, Daniel. Don't doubt that. But right doesn't always mean easy." I nodded. He was right. It didn't feel easy. It felt like grief. That night, I realized that standing up for yourself doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you see them. It forces you to face the truth of who they are when they can no longer take advantage of your silence. And sometimes that truth hurts more than anything. A week passed, and for the first time in months, the house felt like a home again. It was quieter, yes, but the air was lighter. No more tension. No sharp glares across the dinner table. No feeling of walking on eggshells. Still, despite that peace, the ache in my chest wouldn't go away. I missed Marcus. Not the man he'd become under Kelly's influence, but the cousin who used to stay up late with me talking about dreams, girls, and life. The boy who had once called me his brother. I kept hoping he'd come around, but when he finally called again, that hope died quickly. His tone was sharp, defensive from the first word. "I just want to make something clear," he said. "You may have the deed, but that doesn't make you right. You humiliated Kelly when she was vulnerable. You made her feel unsafe in her own home." "In my home," I corrected quietly. He ignored that. "You keep saying that like it's some kind of badge of honor. You think because you paid for the place you're better than us? You're using what Mom and Dad did for you to lord it over everyone. Real family doesn't do that. Real family doesn't lock each other out," I said evenly. There was a pause, and then his voice broke through the static, bitter and cold. "You know what? Keep your precious house. You've made it clear that's all you care about. Just remember, you chose walls over family." Before I could answer, he hung up again. I stared at my phone for a long time, feeling both angry and hollow. It was like arguing with a stranger wearing my cousin's face. No matter what I said, he'd already decided I was the villain in his story. Later that night, Aunt Rachel brought in a tray of tea and sat across from me. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved," she said gently. "Marcus loves Kelly and she knows how to use that. You can't fight that kind of blindness with logic." Uncle David nodded solemnly beside her. "He'll have to learn the hard way, and when that happens, he'll remember who stood by him." I wanted to believe that, but part of me knew the damage might be permanent. The days went on. I poured myself into work, grateful for the distraction. My coworkers knew nothing about my family drama, and I preferred it that way. At least their people respected boundaries. Success wasn't emotional, it was earned. My boss was already hinting at a promotion if I kept performing well. For the first time, I was building a life entirely my own. At home, Uncle David and Aunt Rachel tried to keep things normal. We had quiet dinners together, sometimes laughing about old memories, but there was always an empty chair at the table. Sometimes Aunt Rachel would glance at it without realizing and go quiet for a moment before forcing a smile. Then one evening, the phone rang. Aunt Rachel answered, and I knew immediately by her expression that it was Marcus. She handed me the phone reluctantly. His voice was flat. "Kelly had the baby," he said. I froze. "When?" "3 weeks ago. Her name's Sophie." Something in my chest softened. "That's beautiful," I said quietly. "Congratulations." He didn't reply. The silence stretched until I realized the call had ended. No invitation, no picture. Just a text afterward that said, "Her name is Sophie." That night, Aunt Rachel showed me the photos they'd taken when they visited the hospital. Sophie was tiny, perfect Marcus's nose, Kelly's dark hair. I stared at the image longer than I meant to, feeling a pang of pride mixed with grief. That little girl was family, my niece in all but blood. And yet I might never meet her. Uncle David sighed heavily. "Marcus won't let us bring her here," he said quietly. "Kelly refuses. She says it would confuse the baby." His voice cracked on that last word. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't want to make things harder for them, so I just said, "It's okay. Maybe someday." But deep down, I wasn't sure that day would ever come. Over the next few weeks, I focused on healing. I started therapy, something I'd put off for years. My therapist, Dr. Patterson, was calm and insightful, never judging. She told me something that stuck with me. Grief doesn't just come from death. It also comes from letting go of what you thought people were. That hit hard, because that's exactly what I was doing, mourning the family I thought I had, not the one that actually existed. Uncle David and Aunt Rachel eventually moved in with me full-time. They insisted on paying their share, and for once, I didn't argue. It wasn't about money. It was about mutual respect. We created a rhythm, shared chores, small dinners, quiet evenings filled with laughter again. It wasn't the family we once had, but it was honest, and that mattered more. Sometimes Uncle David would bring up Marcus, usually with a hopeful tone. "Maybe he'll come around," he'd say. Aunt Rachel would smile sadly, but not answer. I never said it out loud, but I wasn't waiting anymore. I had stopped holding my breath for people who had chosen to walk away. One Sunday afternoon, while cleaning the attic, I found an old box labeled Mom. Inside was a stack of letters, the last one written just weeks before my parents' accident. In it, my mother had written, "Don't confuse generosity with erasing yourself. Helping people doesn't mean you owe them your peace." I sat there for a long time, holding that letter, tears slipping down my face. It felt like she was speaking directly to me from across time, reminding me that it was okay to stop sacrificing myself for people who didn't value it. Marcus and Kelly were struggling financially now, from what Aunt Rachel had quietly heard through relatives. But I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. I no longer wanted to prove anything to them. I'd learned something that took me years to understand. Real family isn't about shared blood or history. It's about mutual respect, about people who choose to stand beside you even when things get hard. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Months passed and life slowly began to take shape again. My job was going well better than I ever expected. I threw myself into projects earning trust and responsibility, and for the first time in years I felt grounded. My home, once a battleground of tension, had become a space of peace. Uncle David and Aunt Rachel lived with me now, and our days found a gentle rhythm. We cooked dinner together, watched movies, shared quiet conversations. There were still moments when the ache of loss crept in, especially when Uncle David looked at an old photo of Marcus, or when Aunt Rachel stared at her phone hoping for a message that never came. But little by little the wounds started to scar over. I went back to my hobbies, 2 rock climbing, Dungeons and Dragons nights with friends, cooking on weekends. It felt strange to rediscover who I was outside the shadow of my family's expectations. I wasn't the orphan anymore, or the cousin who stayed too long. I was just Daniel, and for once, that was enough. Every so often I'd think about Marcus and Kelly. From what Aunt Rachel heard through extended relatives, they were struggling financially. Marcus's job had cut his hours and Kelly's online business hadn't taken off. Uncle David once offered to help, but they refused to take his calls. It hurt him deeply, though he tried not to show it. One evening after dinner, he sat across from me with a glass of wine in hand and sighed. "You know, I've spent months thinking about what I could have done differently," he said quietly. "But I realized something. Sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, you can't protect them from their own pride." Aunt Rachel nodded, her voice trembling. "They'll come around when they're ready. And if they don't, we still have each other." It was true. We did. And that truth gave me a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. But even as I found closure, I couldn't shake the sadness that lingered when I thought about my niece Sophie. She was innocent in all this, caught in the fallout of adult pride and bitterness. I often wondered if she'd ever know I existed, or if she'd grow up hearing a version of me that wasn't true. That thought used to crush me. But then I remembered something my therapist once said: "You can't control the story others tell about you. All you can do is live in a way that tells your own truth." So that's what I did. One weekend I decided to finally go through my parents' old things stored in the garage. It took hours, boxes filled with photos, papers, mementos from another lifetime. Near the bottom of one, I found a framed photo of the 4 of us: me, Mom, Dad, and Marcus as a kid. We were sitting by the lake, laughing. I must have been 12. Marcus's arm was slung over my shoulder, our faces smeared with melted ice cream. For a moment I just stared at it, letting the wave of nostalgia wash over me. That photo didn't make me angry. It didn't fill me with regret. It simply reminded me of a truth I had forgotten: that love can be real, even if it doesn't last forever. People change, relationships evolve, and sometimes the ones you love the most are the ones who drift the farthest away. But that doesn't mean what you had wasn't real. It just means it served its time. Weeks later, I framed that photo and placed it on a small shelf in the living room, not as a reminder of what I lost, but as a symbol of how far I'd come. My parents had once given me everything they could: love, guidance, and a home. When they were gone, Uncle David and Aunt Rachel stepped in and did the same. And for years I tried to repay that debt in every way I knew how. But what I finally understood was that love isn't a transaction. It's not about keeping score. True love, real family, is about respect, honesty, and choice. I had spent too long confusing generosity with erasing myself, too long believing that being kind meant staying quiet. But now I knew better. That night, as the sun set outside and the house filled with the smell of Aunt Rachel's cooking, Uncle David turned to me and said softly, "Your mom and dad would be proud of you, Daniel." For the first time, I didn't feel the need to question it. I just smiled and believed him. Later, I sat on the porch watching the fading light, thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the loss, and the peace that followed. I realized that growth often comes dressed as heartbreak, that standing up for yourself doesn't make you cruel. It simply means you've learned where your worth begins and where others' expectations end. Maybe one day Marcus will call. Maybe Sophie will grow up and want to know the truth. If that day comes, I'll open the door. But if it doesn't, I'll still be okay. Because I've finally learned the difference between forgiveness and surrender. Real family doesn't ask you to give up your peace just to keep them comfortable. Real family respects your boundaries. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for others and for yourself is to stop letting guilt decide what love should look like. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up for yourself even when it meant losing someone you loved?